Stat Rollers, Bill with RollStats. Today we're going back to 1978, back to a time when dungeons were dangerous, loot was hard-earned, and new players were just getting their first taste of, good old-fashioned D&D adventure. We're going to revisit and reminisce about Dungeon Module B1, In Search of the Unknown. This is the very first module published for D&D Basic, hence its designation, B1. This is a module that I don't think gets enough love. It's criminally underrated, in my opinion. B1 wasn't just another dungeon crawl. No, it was designed from the ground up to be an introductory adventure for new dungeon masters and players alike. This module was meant to be, a teaching tool, a sandbox, and a training ground all rolled into one. So whether you're a DM looking to run something truly classic, a player that's curious about old school adventures, or you just want to revel in the nostalgia of these sweet old TSR modules, then this video is for you. But before we go any further, this is your obligatory spoiler warning. If you haven't played through In Search of the Unknown yet, we're going to be talking about what's inside this module, what makes B1 so special, and what's hidden within the Caverns of Quasqueton. So if you want to experience it firsthand, maybe send your DM this way instead, and come back after your first playthrough. For the rest of you, stick around because we're diving into all of that and more right now. Alright, if you're still here, grab your sweet, sweet Planet of the Apes lunchbox. Make sure your hair is parted down the middle and, has that perfect feather going on. And hop on your Schwinn because we're setting the Wayback Machine to 1978 to talk about the history and legacy of this piece of D&D history. Dungeon Module B1, In Search of the Unknown. If you started playing D&D in the late 70s or early 80s, chances are In Search of the Unknown was your first real dungeon crawl, or at least one of the first. This introductory module, first published in 1978 and written by Mike Carr, was designed for use with the D&D Basic Set. In fact, this module was included in the Blue Box set, the Holmes Basic Box set, not to be confused with the Moldvay Cook Blue Box Expert set. That was 1981. This was included with the very first basic rules set, before the Moldvay revisions, before B2, the Keep on the Borderlands, really took over as the default starting adventure. Unlike later modules that populated every room and laid out every monster and treasure, B1 was a learning tool for DMs, a sandbox dungeon that encouraged creativity. It provided a fully mapped out dungeon, the infamous Caverns of Quasqueton, but it left the key detail, specifically the monster and treasure placements, up to the DM. This meant monsters and loot weren't set in stone. You as the dungeon master had to populate it yourself, either pulling from a random table in the module or, creating your own encounters. In hindsight, some folks think this was an odd choice, and you'll hear complaints that the dungeon is unfinished, like, why would I run a pre-written adventure that's only partially written? But that complaint really misses the point. This was 1978. Most people hadn't even heard of Dungeons & Dragons at the time. The game was only 4 years old, and by that I mean OD&D was 4 years old, right? White Box D&D, the original 3 booklets D&D. So the rule set for this module, the Holmes Basic Revision, tried to clean up those rules and make them easier to run, but there was no internet to turn to for the 5 best tricks to be a great DM or the 10 best monsters to use in your next adventure. So, players needed to be shown how to play the game, yes, but DMs needed to be shown how to run the game. There wasn't this huge wealth of pre-written material for new DMs to run, so TSR had to show new DMs how to create their own dungeons. They had to show them how to populate dungeons, and that's really what this module is for, because what B1 really teaches isn't just how to play D&D, it teaches how to run it. Most TSR modules, whether you're looking at a short funhouse-style dungeon like White Plume Mountain, or a massive sprawling complex like the Temple of Elemental Evil, come with a preset cast of monsters, traps, and rewards. But In Search of the Unknown hands you a mapped dungeon with room descriptions and says, here you go, DM, make it your own. This was revolutionary because TSR was essentially teaching new DMs how to create their own adventure. Instead of just running a game, you were designing one. And for players, this module had all the hallmarks of a classic dungeon crawl. A mysterious abandoned fortress, a maze of corridors, hidden chambers, and deadly traps. It is perfect for new players to learn the ropes of exploration and, it had a real emphasis on player choice. Yes, the dungeon is dangerous, but it rewards caution, cleverness, and teamwork. So, Although B1 was eventually overshadowed by B2 Keep on the Borderlands, this module has remained a staple in early D&D history. I've played through it countless times. I've run it countless times. It doesn't just tell you how to play. The introduction explains the core mechanics of D&D. There's a roster of 48 pre-generated characters to get players started, and even a section on henchmen and hirelings, a mechanic that was a much bigger deal in early D&D than it is today. But the real magic of B1 is that it's a blank slate. It's a toolbox. It's a way to train new dungeon masters and let them make the game their own. And honestly, that's what D&D is all about. Compared to later modules like the Keep on the Borderlands, B1 doesn't have a whole campaign setting tied to it. But what it does have is a mystery, a lost fortress filled with strange artifacts, weird rooms, and lingering echoes of its former occupants. And, that brings us to the hook. Alright, so let's set the stage. Every good adventure needs a hook, a mystery, and a legendary past, and In Search of the Unknown delivers all three. So here's the deal. A long time ago, two infamous figures, Rogan the Fearless and Zeligar the Unknown, built themselves a secret fortress. A hidden sanctuary carved out of a rocky hill deep in the wilderness. No roads led to it, no maps mark its location, and its name is whispered only in old tales. The Caverns of Quasqueton. But these weren't just any adventurers. Rogan was a warrior of unmatched prowess, said to have single-handedly butchered entire hordes of foes, and Zeligar was his mysterious wizard counterpart, a man whose magic was as feared as it was misunderstood. The two were powerful, secretive, and more than a little ruthless, right? Together, they created a fortified underground lair hidden from prying eyes. Why hide away? Some say they were driven by paranoia, others claim greed, some even believe they dabbled in dark magic. But what's clear is that they spent decades constructing their stronghold, hauling stone, carving chambers into the rock, even using slaves and magic to speed up the process. For years, Rogan and Zeligar used Quasqueton as their base of operations, emerging only for occasional forays into the outside world. They had a few allies, no real kingdom to call their own, and no interest in ruling the lands. If anything, they seemed more obsessed with power for its own sake. Most people feared them, but their reputation skyrocketed when they led a decisive defense against a barbarian invasion. Rogan waded into battle, carving through the enemy like a god of war, while Zeligar's sorcery shattered entire battalions. Together, they broke the barbarian horde, earning the gratitude of the nearby citizens. For their heroics, the people showered them with gold, a treasure of hoard fit for kings. And what did they do? They vanished. They returned to their fortress, supposedly using the wealth to expand Quasqueton even further, sealing themselves away once more in their hidden domain. And then they just disappeared. Years passed, and one day word spread that Rogan and Zeligar had marched north, taking their strongest warriors with them, into the lands of their old barbarian foes. Why? No one knows. Maybe revenge, maybe greed, maybe some secret magic buried in those wild lands. What is known is that they never returned. Rumors tell of a great battle of blood-soaked fields and of the warrior and wizard meeting their doom far from home. The details are pretty vague. No one can say for certain what really happened. And that leaves the big question, right? What happened to Quasqueton? And more importantly, the treasure that lies within. The fortress still exists, but it's been abandoned for years and no one has seen the place. No one knows what lurks inside, and no one has looted its secrets. That's where the players come in. The stronghold is a treasure trove waiting to be explored. It's a dungeon filled with mystical artifacts, lost riches, and forgotten dangers. If Zeligar and Rogan really are dead, then everything they left behind is up for grabs. The only problem, you don't know what's in there. So what do the players know? Or, think they know, right? Before they even set foot in Quasqueton, adventurers have heard stories, half-truths, rumors, and outright lies about what's inside. Rather than giving them a simple lore dump, they'll use the legend table to hand out bits and pieces of information. Here's how it works. Each player is going to roll a d4, and that determines how many rumors they know. Then you roll a d20 for each rumor they get. Now, some of these rumors are true, but others are just total lies, right? The players won't know which is which. The Dungeon Master reveals each player's rumor in secret, and it's up to the players whether they share the information. They could keep it to themselves, or they could even outright lie to the rest of the party, right? Some of the rumors are actually valuable hints, and you need to give them some of these true hints. Don't give them all false hints, even if you roll it out that way. So, for example, the complex has 2 levels. Absolutely true, and they should know that. There are secret doors, rooms, and passageways in parts of the complex. Also true, and something you should reveal to them, right? But others are half-truths. So not outright lies, but not completely true either. So, for example, Rogan's trophy room has battle relics and slain monster remains. This is mostly true. There is a trophy room, but what's in there might be more dangerous than the party expects, right? And then there are just the total lies, the complete fabrications and falsehoods that people just make up, right? The treasures of Zeligar and Rogan are hidden in a pool of water. This is false. There is a pool room, which is really cool, but it's got nothing to do with treasure, although it's a great room and you're going to love it. Or my absolute favorite. An enchanted stone inside the stronghold will grant a wish to anyone who places a piece of it in their mouth. This is completely false, but I love it when players desperately chip off bits of rock trying this. It's fantastic. You'll see what I mean later on. So this system adds to the mystery. It keeps players guessing and makes them feel like real adventurers piecing together a forgotten legend. So why does this legend work as a good hook? This isn't just some random dungeon, right? It's a place with a history, a sense of purpose, and a real narrative hook. The fortress wasn't built as a death trap. This isn't the Tomb of Horrors. It was Rogan and Zeligar's home. The place was never fully finished, so parts of it might be incomplete or unstable. They left suddenly, meaning whatever is inside now isn't what they planned. That last point is important because if Rogan and Zeligar aren't around anymore, who's in Quasqueton now? That's for you, the Dungeon Master, to decide. This is where B1 hands over the reins and lets you make it your own. So I'll give you a few ideas how that has worked for me, right? So a new faction has moved in. Could be goblins, could be bandits, could be cultists, or it could be much worse. It all depends on you. Or this one's good. The ghosts of Rogan and Zeligar might still haunt the halls. Traps and magical defenses are still active. Zeligar's old spells didn't fade with time. His unfinished magical experiments could still be running around and have mutated into horrible creatures. The treasure is still here, but, getting to it isn't going to be easy. The beauty of In Search of the Unknown is that it's an open-ended mystery. You as the DM get to decide what secrets Quasqueton still holds. That means every time it's played, it's a different adventure. All right, let's get down to it. The dungeon itself. The Caverns of Quasqueton aren't just some generic underground labyrinth. This place was built with a purpose. It was a fortress, a refuge, and a place of power for 2 of the most enigmatic figures in the land. But now it's abandoned, and that means it's ripe for the taking. If you're running B1 In Search of the Unknown, this section is your playground. It's packed with classic dungeon crawl elements, hidden doors, winding corridors, and monsters lurking around every corner. But it's also a blank slate that lets you customize things to your heart's content. This adventure is designed for a party of 3 to 8 adventurers with, your standard mix of fighters, magic users, clerics, thieves, and hirelings. If your players are clever, they're going to bring along henchmen. Extra muscle and torches never hurt. But don't let them stack too many magic items or over-optimize, or the challenge can quickly evaporate. The Caverns of Quasqueton are carved directly out of a massive rock outcropping, high atop a forested hill. It's an isolated, wind-swept, eerie place, and that's something you should really play up when describing it. So imagine the scene. The wind howls through the trees, whipping through tangled vines that crawl over the craggy black stone of the entrance. The air is thick and damp, heavy with the smell of wet rock and decay. Inside, torches flicker strangely, their flames struggling to stay alight in the oppressive atmosphere. Some rooms are layered in dust, untouched for years, maybe decades, but in others, fresh tracks hint that something else has moved in. This isn't just a cave, it's a stronghold. It was built to last, but time, abandonment, and intruders, have left their mark. And the best part, your players don't know what's waiting inside. So the upper level of Quasqueton is pretty refined by dungeon standards. This isn't a rough natural cave system. This was meant to be a home and headquarters for two incredibly powerful figures. The walls are smoothly carved stone, reinforced in places with masonry, and the ceilings are 8 to 10 feet high, making everything feel just a little too spacious for comfort. That said, not all of it was finished, right? Some areas are cruder, rougher, as if construction was abandoned mid-project. And that's where things get interesting, because the deeper you go, the less controlled the environment feels. Corridors are mostly 10 feet wide, giving plenty of room for party movement. The doors are massive, thick wooden slabs about 5 or 6 inches thick, and 1/3 of them are locked, meaning players will need to pick, bash, or burn their way through. Breaking a door is loud, and loud noises tend to attract attention, which is where the Wandering Monsters table comes in. Here's a golden rule of running B1. Don't ever let the dungeon feel static. It should be alive. The best way to keep tension high? Wandering Monsters. Every second turn, roll a d6. On a roll of 6, something stirs in the darkness. So here's what you might throw at your players, based on the Wandering Monsters table within B1. A group of D4 orcs, your standard cannon fodder humanoids. These orcs are bloodthirsty, savage killers that have been living here for years. They're scavenging whatever they can. So what have they turned the fortress into? That's for you to decide. Or they might encounter 1 or 2 giant centipedes. Not tough in and of themselves, but they've got poisonous bites. And this is great for freaking out your party, especially if they don't have, an antidote for that poison. Or maybe a group of D6 kobolds. Kobolds are sneaky, cowardly, and dangerous in numbers. Maybe they've built makeshift traps out of the old supplies. Or how about 1 or 2 troglodytes? Smelly, aggressive, and tougher than they look, right? The first time players get ambushed and stink bombed, they're going to learn to take them seriously, quickly. Trust me on this one, right? Or a group of giant rats. What's a dungeon without giant rats? Not a threat by themselves until one bites a player and then you start hinting at disease. Or, finally, you could throw a couple berserkers at them, right? These could be ex-henchmen of Rogan and Zeligar, crazed survivors, or some other warband, right? They fight like madmen because they are madmen. This random encounter system isn't just there to provide combat. It makes the dungeon feel alive, not static. The players should always feel like something else is moving just beyond their torchlight. But remember though, B1 isn't a hack and slash meat grinder. It's a sandbox. The dungeon is a puzzle. Players need to navigate it carefully, deal with the locked doors, and figure out how to move between levels, but it should be achievable. It's a beginner module, right? The atmosphere should be unsettling. Torches burn smokily, the air is thick, and not everything inside is as dead as it seems. The monsters should be opportunistic. Orcs and kobolds don't just sit and wait for adventurers. They move, they scavenge, they react, right? They're reacting to what your players are doing. Exploration should matter. There are secrets hidden in the stronghold that tell its history. Rogan and Zeligar's presence lingers even in their absence. If you run it right, the upper level of Quasqueton should feel like an abandoned fortress, but one that's far from empty. Alright, so we've covered the upper level, the relatively civilized, built-to-last fortress where Rogan and Zeligar once lived and worked. But down here, down on the second level, it's a completely different story. The lower level of Quasqueton isn't refined stonework or well-planned chambers. It's rough, unfinished, and unpredictable. This isn't just a dungeon, it's a raw, untamed labyrinth of natural caverns and forgotten corridors. Think of it like this. If the upper level was meant to be a stronghold, this level was either an expansion project gone unfinished or a place they never intended others to see. Either way, it's really dangerous for the players. So, how do you make this level feel different? How do you make level 2 feel different than level 1? Well, the walls are jagged and uneven. Instead of the smooth cut stone of the fortress above, down here the rock is rough, natural, and it's unstable in places. The passageways twist and shift, making mapping frustratingly difficult, and players are going to get lost if they're not careful, right? Like, mapping was important in old school D&D. The floors are treacherous. Unlike the relatively clean halls of the upper level, this place is littered with debris, rock chips, loose gravel, and even the occasional collapsed passageway, right? Some areas might even be unstable, forcing players to move carefully or risk a new cave-in, which is, great to see the paranoia set in with your players. Doors still do exist down here, but they're not always obvious. While the upper level had solid wooden doors, down here, many secret doors are disguised as solid rock. Without meticulous searching, players aren't even going to know they exist. Bottom line, the vibe down here should feel completely different from the upper level. Imagine the players moving through winding, narrow corridors where the walls seem to close in, their torchlight barely reaching the edges, and every sound echoes strangely in the confined space. Unlike the structured halls above, the lower level feels untouched, right? As if no one has set foot here in decades or longer. And that begs the question, what's still lurking down here? If the upper level was home to scavengers and opportunists, the lower level is where the real nightmares live. Just like before, check for wandering monsters every second turn. Roll a d6, and on a 6, something comes out of the darkness. Something is moving around down here. Could be troglodytes again, but in greater numbers and more organized. They blend into the stone, stink like hell, forcing penalties on players nearby, and they attack in vicious flurries. If they show up, they're going to strike fast and they're going to disappear. Think guerrilla style. Could be a crab spider. You ever see a massive silent spider that drops from the ceiling and bites you before you can react? That's this thing, right? Its venom can kill a low-level character outright. So when they first encounter it, play it slow, build the suspense, and then let the screaming begin. Could be a pack of kobolds who set up shop, probably setting up traps everywhere, pitfalls, swinging blades, or even alarm systems that alert something much worse nearby. The kobolds themselves aren't scary, but their craftiness are going to make your players paranoid. One of the best parts about the lower level of Quasqueton is that it's unfinished, meaning you can make it as mysterious, dangerous, or weird as you want. So here are a few ideas that I use to make it feel truly unique, right? The Forgotten Lab is where Zeligar's secret experiments still linger. This is proof of his necromancy, right? Because of course he was a necromancer. There's like half-finished spells, broken magical constructs, and maybe even a trapped demonic entity still active in this abandoned section, right? The Buried Dead consists of Rogan and Zeligar's old soldiers and servants. They might still be down here, but they're not resting easy. Skeletons, ghouls, or even wights could rise from their forgotten graves. The shifting caverns are, they're a series of tunnels that seem to change. Some collapse, some reform. Maybe it's just unstable rock, or maybe it's something worse. Either way, mapping them is going to be a nightmare for your players. And the final vault is the last treasure chamber, right? It's hidden and forgotten. But it wasn't meant to be found. It was never meant to be found. Traps, arcane seals, and the restless spirits of its builders could stand between the party and unimaginable riches. The point is, make it feel like a different dungeon. If the upper level is a fortress, the lower level is a tomb. Use heavier descriptions, emphasize the rough terrain, and let the players feel the claustrophobia. Use darkness and confusion. The uneven corridors, crumbling pathways, and hidden doors should make players feel off balance. Mapping should be a nightmare. Encourage them to trust their instincts, not just their nose. Make the monsters feel unpredictable. This isn't a place where monsters just sit in rooms waiting to be fought. Things move, creatures hunt, and players, are never alone. Foreshadow the deeper horrors. Even if the players never reach the deepest parts, let them hear things, strange noises from below, unsettling carvings in the rock, or whispers when no one is talking. It adds to the tension. I often hear the complaint that old school dungeon crawling is basically just a monster zoo, right? Where monsters just sit in rooms waiting for adventurers to kick in the door and take their stuff. I hate to tell you this, right? But if that's your experience, if that's been your experience, that has more to do with the person running the game than with the actual written material. The dungeon is static if you run it that way. The dungeon is alive and reactive and engaging if you run it that way. That's just the truth. B1, especially B1, because of the way it's designed, can be as intricate and detailed as you want it to be, Because it's yours. When I think of B1, I don't think of a monster zoo. I think of two things. Two things immediately come to mind. The entrance with the magic mouths and the room of pools. The entrance to the Caverns of Quasqueton isn't just a doorway. It's an invitation to mystery, danger, and the unknown. Like any great dungeon entrance, it sets the tone for everything that follows. Your players might be eager, cautious, or downright paranoid. But one thing is certain. Once they step inside, they'll realize there's no turning back, right? Approaching the stronghold, a narrow, winding path leads up this craggy outcropping of black stone, barely visible through the thick overgrowth of, vines and trees and vegetation. The entrance itself is a cave-like opening, almost hidden behind the tangle of all of these weeds and trees. But with a little effort, pushing aside vines, hacking through branches, it becomes clear. This is the way in. The air is heavy, cool, and damp, the kind of stillness that makes you wonder if something or someone is watching you, right? A 10-foot wide corridor stretches into the rock, leading straight to a massive wooden door. The door is intact, but it's not untouched. Bits of wood are chipped away as if someone, forced their way through not too long ago. If the players examine the door, they'll notice the damage immediately. If they don't, they have a 10% chance per adventurer to sort of spot the signs, right? 40% if there are 4 or more of them. If they spot the marks, let your players speculate. Who forced open this door? Well, what happened to them? Lay the breadcrumbs for that paranoia to set in, the unknown. It is the in search of the unknown, right? Just beyond the entrance, the corridor is lined with 3 pairs of alcoves. At first glance, they're empty and, lifeless, but their purpose is clear. They were meant for defense, once manned by guards ready to ambush intruders. But now, they're abandoned. Or are they? Secrets and surprises await. The first set of alcoves is completely empty. It gives your players this false sense of security. The second set of alcoves appears empty, but hides something more sinister. These are actually one-way secret doors. There's no way for the players to detect them from this side, right? But they are secret doors. But if something were inside, it could emerge behind them as they pass, right? So this is your chance to sort of ambush your party. The third set of alcoves is different, though. The moment the players step between the third pair of alcoves, a sudden booming voice echoes through the whole chamber. Who dares enter this place and intrude upon the sanctuary of its inhabitants? Before the party can react, another voice, louder, mocking and really just like drenched in doom, rings out. Only a group of foolhardy explorers doomed to certain death. Then, together, in a chilling chorus of wrathful, evil laughter, they say, Woe to any who pass this place. The wrath of Zelagar and Rogan will be upon thee. And then the laughter lingers, echoing in the corridor as these disembodied mouths vanish. And just like that, the room falls silent again. This is a fantastic intimidation tactic. It's purely psychological, right? Like there's no actual threat from these magic mouths, just fear and doubt creeping into the players' minds. Then, just beyond the alcoves, the corridor ends in a junction where paths lead east and west, but before the players can think about direction, they see dead bodies, right? A hand-to-hand battle happened here long ago. 5 combatants lay dead. Their corpses are sort of, in various states of decomposition, is the nice way to put it, right? The scene of slaughter is grim. The stench of death is... It's overpowering. Really play this up. So the fallen fighter is a human warrior, slumped against the wall. His sword is snapped in half. It's a useless hunk in his grip. His armor stripped, leaving him only a belt pouch with a few gold pieces. The impaled wizard is a human magic user, pinned to the wall by a sword still lodged in his chest. If the players pull the sword free, the body slumps to the ground, revealing a carving beneath. Crudely scratched but readable, the word Quasqueton is left behind. His blood-stained robe contains a pouch with 2 gold pieces and, some garlic buds to really play up the paranoia. The dead dwarf is face down, a trail of dried blood marking his final crawl. His warhammer is still clenched in his hand, his armor is gone, his helmet dented and useless. And then there's a berserker guard, likely one of Quasqueton's defenders. His broken wooden shield lies nearby, stripped of armor. His weapon is gone. You can tell that he's been looted. Something else has been here. And then finally, the last guard is another berserker, his head crushed by a warhammer blow, probably the dwarf. And his belt holds a dagger, but his ornate leather belt, possibly valuable, has been ruined by the bloodstains. What happened here, right? The details paint a grim picture. It's not just a monster zoo. This wasn't just a skirmish. It was desperation. It was a fight to the death. The adventurers were unprepared. They didn't even make it past the entrance. And it should make your players, your adventurers, think about that. The guards fought to the last man, even as the fortress crumbled. But who looted the bodies? Was it survivors or something else still lurking deeper in the dungeon? Let your players draw their own conclusions, but make it clear that they are not the first ones here, and they probably aren't going to be the last. B1 is to this day one of the best entries into a dungeon I have ever run. And of course, there's the Room of Pools. Well, one of the most famous rooms in the entire module, the one that everyone remembers, the one that I do for sure. This isn't your standard dungeon chamber filled with dust-covered furniture, forgotten corpses, or old treasure chests. No. This place is weird, magical, and utterly intriguing. It's a true curiosity for your players to puzzle over. Imagine the moment your players step inside. The largest chamber on the upper level has black stone walls, just like the rest of the dungeon, but the floor is something else entirely. It's a massive, intricately designed mosaic of golden brown tiles laid out in ornate swirling patterns. There's no hidden message, no arcane symbols, just pure decorative craftsmanship, right? But the real draw is the 14 pools, each 10 feet wide, spread throughout the room like a strange arcane arrangement. And the kicker is every single pool is different and something for your players to discover. This isn't just a room to pass through, it's an experience, a mystery, and potentially a death trap all in one, right? Some of these pools can heal, some can kill, and some are just plain weird, but the players won't know which is which until they start experimenting. And trust me, your players are gonna start experimenting. Here's where you, as the DM, get to have some fun. This room is a sandbox of consequences, and it's all about how the players interact with it. Bottom line, the Room of Pools is a perfect mix of wonder, danger, and just player-driven chaos. It rewards curiosity, but it punishes recklessness. It's one of the most memorable rooms in any of these classic TSR modules. So lean into the mystery, the weirdness, and consequences. Trust me, your players are never going to forget it. Alright DMs, this is where you take the bones of this dungeon and breathe life into it. The Caverns of Quasqueton are your playground, and this is where you make it unique, even if another DM is running the same exact module. Think of this as the final prep step before throwing your players into the depths and danger of discovery, right? Keying a dungeon is simple in theory. Place monsters where it makes sense or where it doesn't if you want to keep things weird, right? Hide treasures where players might or might not find them. Use logic, but not too much logic. This is Dungeons & Dragons after all, and it's classic D&D. So with over 50 rooms spread across 2 levels, you got a decent sized dungeon here. It's small compared to some mega dungeons, but there's enough space to reward exploration without your players losing steam. You're going to be assigning between 16 and 20 monsters from the monster list and 15 to 25 treasures from the treasure list. Where you put them, that's all you, boss, right? Like, that's for you to figure out. This isn't just about randomly dropping monsters and loot into rooms. It's about making the dungeon feel alive. When you're doing this, when you're keying your dungeon, ask yourself these questions. Why is this here? Even if the answer is because it's cool, give some rooms a logical reason for their contents. Did the orcs move in after Rogan and Zelagar vanished? Are the zombies former guards? What doesn't make sense? Dungeons should feel a little weird. Not every encounter should have a perfect explanation. Sometimes the unknown is scarier than an obvious setup. Maybe that ghoul in the empty kitchen doesn't belong there. Or maybe it does. So how hard should it be to find treasure? Players should have to work for it. Hide treasures under loose flagstones, inside old barrels, or behind one-way doors. Make your players earn their loot. What's changed? The dungeon isn't static. Things move. Maybe the kobolds stole a treasure from another room, or the troglodytes dragged a corpse into their lair. Try to keep things dynamic. If you've never stocked a dungeon before, lean heavily on the monster and treasures lists included in the module. But if you're an old pro, if you've keyed dungeons before, go crazy. Really, make it wild. Make it as crazy as you want it. And speaking of the treasure list, where's the loot in B1? Treasure placement is kind of an art form. Players should never feel like loot is just lying out in the open, waiting for them to grab it. You should create good places to hide the treasure. Inside a hollowed out book or skull, under a blood-stained rug, behind a secret panel in a wall, beneath a loose tile or floorboard, inside a locked chest, preferably trapped, stuffed inside a monster's stomach, disguised as junk like a worthless goblet that's actually worth 100 gold pieces, or in a cursed container. Open it and something bad happens. You get the idea. But players should never find all the treasure. Some should stay hidden. Give them a reason to come back to Quasqueton. So once you've placed everything, step back and look at your dungeon as a whole. Look at everything that you've created, everything that you've keyed, and ask yourself, does the layout make sense? Could an adventuring party realistically navigate this place? Specifically if they're newbies, right? Are there enough clues to keep them curious? Think mysterious markings, half-written notes, or suspiciously empty rooms. It builds the intrigue. Does your dungeon have variety? Not every room should be a monster fight or a treasure grab. Some should just be strange or eerie or just puzzling, right? Is there at least one what the hell moment, right? Like, every dungeon should have something unexpected in it. Maybe a talking statue, a dead adventurer's journal, or a trap that doesn't trigger until they leave the room. And if you go through and you ask yourself all these questions and you look back and they're all answered, then that's it. Your dungeon is keyed. It's prepped and primed for adventure. The Caverns of Quasqueton are now uniquely yours, right? Now, all that's left is to throw your players in and see if they survive. So final verdict, when we talk about In Search of the Unknown, we're not just talking about another dungeon crawl. This module was a turning point in early Dungeons & Dragons, a bridge between the wargaming roots of the game and the more narrative-driven, player-centric adventures that would follow. It wasn't about throwing players into a meat grinder or scripting this grand epic, right? Instead, it gave the DMs tools to make a game their own, to learn by doing, and to embrace creativity over rigid structure. B1 is a reminder of what old school gaming is all about. It teaches players to be cautious, clever, and cooperative. It challenges DMs to think on their feet, to breathe life into a dungeon that's more than just rooms filled with monsters and loot. It's a training ground, a toolkit, and a challenge wrapped in one. Is it perfect? No, right? The lack of pre-placed monsters and treasure can make it feel incomplete to some, especially newer players, right? And it does require a DM willing to put in work to key the dungeon. But that's the magic of In Search of the Unknown. It demands engagement from both the dungeon master and the players. And when you take the time to make it your own, it rewards you with an experience that feels truly unique to you and your party. So whether you're running B1 for nostalgia, using it to introduce new players to the game, or just looking for a solid old school dungeon crawl with plenty of room for customization, this module still holds up. It's a piece of D&D history, a foundational adventure, and a perfect way to embrace old school gaming. So what's my final verdict? I love Dungeon Module B1 In Search of the Unknown. And I think you should run it at least once. Everyone should run it at least once. But I want to know what you think. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think of Dungeon Module B1. Do you own it? Have you played through it? Have you run it? What did you think? Let me know. And hey, if you don't own it, great news. You can grab a copy of Dungeon Module B1 in print or PDF at DriveThruRPG. I've dropped a link in the description and the pinned comment where you can pick up your own copy of Dungeon Module B1 In Search of the Unknown if you're interested in running through it. Okay. That's going to do it for today's Stat Rollers. If you enjoyed this review, hit that like button. Subscribe for more TTRPG content. I've got quite a few reviews coming covering a wide variety of classic, sort of OSR and indie games, and supplements, including more classic TSR modules. And remember to drop a comment letting me know what you thought of Dungeon Module B1 in Search of the Unknown. Really, let's talk about it. So until next time, grab your dice, light your torches, and step lightly. The Caverns of Quasqueton await, and may the dice roll ever in your favor.